各位觀眾大家好，歡迎收睇26分鐘見證實錄精華回顧。華裔係最早移民加拿大嘅亞洲族裔之一。咁早期嘅華人移民喺居住、社交同埋文化各方面呢，都被隔離於加拿大嘅主流社會之外。而隨住歲月嘅累積，華裔唔單止成功咁融入主流社會，並且對加拿大嘅多元文化作出咗卓越嘅貢獻。唔係卑詩省有好多被歷史及社區所銘記嘅華裔啦，佢哋嘅個人經歷有趣感人，同時亦都係還原咗早年華裔社區嘅風貌。咁我哋一齊去聽聽佢哋嘅故事啊！
And together, we pressured the city through many meetings and many hours and lots of news coverage to stop urban renewal.
My brothers volunteered, which did not make my mother happy. You could be shot dead and that, but they both wanted to contribute, and there was nothing Mom could do.
Words to the younger people, the little people, is that forgive, but don't forget. If you forget things, it may happen again.
我覺得呢個係華埠係代表咗唔止話我哋華人嘅歷史，亦都係代表咗整個加拿大嘅歷史。
And so for me, personally, it was really important that the sacrifice of my grandfather's generation was honored and provide us inspiration for the people of today and the future.
It was me and Mom when I was younger than.
When we were kids, we felt that we didn't have our mother because she belonged to everybody.
74歲嘅 Shirley Chan 陳雪英仍然記得同母親相關嘅點點滴滴。
She would cook for people, right? So it wasn't just buying buns for tea. A lot of the meetings that they happened in our house, she would, make fried rice or chow mein or something so that people would have something to eat. Christmas time, we'd have a tree and half the floor in the living room would be filled with gifts. And that was people who brought them because to say thank you for helping them.
陳雪英嘅母親 Mary Lee Chan 陳李和順喺上世紀60年代係溫哥華華埠知名嘅社區活躍人士。佢形容母親堅強、熱情，相信正義同人權，為拯救華埠社區而努力。
My mother, she knew everybody because she helped everybody. She helped people find work. She helped people find homes. She helped people find husbands, or wives rather in those days. And she helped people find daycare. So she knew everybody in the neighborhood, and she organized the community. She appointed people as block captains so that one person per block could go around and keep the neighborhood informed. And so together, they helped to rally all the Chinatown societies, and there are many, and they don't always agree, but on this subject, the need to fight racism and injustice and the freeway through Chinatown was something we all agreed on.
陳雪英所提到嘅高速公路興建計劃係溫哥華市政府喺1950年代已經開始研究嘅城市更新計劃。為咗落實該計劃，當局需要喺華埠、士達孔拿區以及煤氣鎮一帶清拆多座嘅建築物，以為高速公路項目讓路。因此，陳雪英嘅母親 Mary 就挺身而出，帶領社區居民集體抗議，以保護該社區不被分裂，居民嘅權益得到保障。而喺1968年已經係大學生嘅陳雪英，亦都加入積極協助母親。
I was no longer a 10-year-old dragging around after my mother trying to get people to sign a petition. I was a university student. My friends and classmates were university students, and together we could write briefs. We were able to speak for ourselves. We could speak. We understood how, we spoke English, and I was fortunate. One of my psychology professor had worked for CBC Hourglass. So she got me an interview on television, and that helped get the ball rolling. And together, we pressured the city through many meetings and many hours and lots of news coverage to stop urban renewal. But the thing is, SPOTA, Strathcona Property Owners and Tenants Association, that formed to stop the freeway and urban renewal in Chinatown and Strathcona, we were successful in joining forces, in marching, in protesting, and being heard. We used to bus our seniors and our families up to City Hall so they could sit in the council chambers and listen to the decision making of council. That was a way in which we got attention and that we were able to stop the plans.
因此喺經過數年嘅艱苦抗爭之後，最終令市府喺1973年對整個計劃重新規劃，停止修建高速公路，保住咗士達孔拿社區以及華埠。
Pierre Elliott Trudeau, our Prime Minister, appointed Robert Andras as the Minister of Urban Affairs, and he came to the community, and his senior policy advisor, and he said, I will not provide funding for any project that does not have the support of the community.
陳雪英話：當時佢嘅父母都傾盡全力，相信抗爭會成功。
My mother had failed twice, but that wasn't going to stop her. And my dad, felt that at some point we would get through to the right people. And we would phone the council members and say, we want you to come and meet with our people. We invite them to come to our meetings. We had a meeting every Sunday in our local community. I think in my family home, we had meetings every day practically in that time. It was so intense. And but we had a lot of hope that we could succeed.
而呢一段珍貴而難忘嘅過去就被收錄喺呢一間啱啱喺去年11月初開設喺溫哥華華埠嘅華埠掌故館之中。
Interesting, at the end of the railroad, when they completed the railroad in 1885, they didn't want the Chinese to stay. So that's why they had no place to go, and that's why the beginning of Chinatown is also 1885. This is where they had to come. As a place because many of them didn't have enough money to go back to China, so they ended up coming here.
華埠基金會主席，亦都係華埠掌故館創辦人之一嘅李佩珍 Carol Lee 介紹話，華埠掌故館致力於記錄同埋分享華裔家人社區嘅文化故事，俾大家了解華裔移民喺150年歷史之中嘅個人經歷，以及對加拿大發展嘅貢獻。
We could not think of a better cultural sort of project to do than a storytelling center. Because if you think about it, there's not really any place where our story has been told. And we thought it would be wonderful if we could build a place where, we call it a storytelling center, where we could collect our stories and tell them in a way that is, I think, impactful and gives people an understanding of what the contribution has been of the Chinese Canadians over the course of the last 150 years in building the city, the province and the country.
而喺呢一度所有嘅展覽之中，佢認為最重要嘅兩個歷史章節就係太平洋鐵路嘅興建，以及自願參加二戰嘅華裔加拿大士兵。
Without the Chinese labor, it's very likely that the railroads would not have been built, and then British Columbia would actually be part of the United States. And the future of Canada would have been very different. We would have been an Atlantic-facing country. When the young Chinese men we couldn't call them Canadians because they weren't Canadian citizens, but they decided they were going to fight in the Second World War. And in doing so, in fighting for a country that didn't actually want them, they were able to gain the right to vote, not just for the Chinese community, but for all visible minorities. So it's an incredible accomplishment. And I think these stories, even they're so big, and yet they're relatively unknown.
Carol Lee 話：華埠掌故館作為一個長久嘅項目，將會不斷研究同埋補充新嘅故事，而呢一個只係開始。
And I think that it's important to show how the Chinese struggled very much in the early years, but they persevered, and they really managed to do it on their own. They didn't get any help from government. And I think that what they did is they decided they were going to be, support each other in a community. And that was sort of the basis of the society buildings and the associations. So there's so much to be proud of. They really, in so many ways, did it in spite of all of the obstacles.
So this is Frank. He's joined the Army. Bing joined short. Like when, at the time that was World War II, if you you were conscripted. If you were Caucasian, you had to fight during World War II. Both my brothers volunteered. They wanted to.
曾經參與第二次世界大戰嘅加拿大華裔軍人，亦都係溫哥華首名華裔會計師嘅黃炳超冰超汪，佢嘅故事亦都被收錄喺華埠掌故館之中。冰嘅妹妹，現年86歲嘅 Frances 回憶話，當時兩個哥哥自願參軍，令佢哋嘅母親非常擔憂。
My brothers volunteered, which did not make my mother happy. You could be shot dead and that. But they both wanted to contribute, and there was nothing Mom could do because they came home and announced it to her, and she was extremely upset because you did not have to join up if you were a colored person at that time.
而喺佢嘅印象之中，冰一直係為華人社區工作同埋服務。
And my brother Bing has his bookkeeping practice. He worked there, so all his clients were mainly the people down Chinatown would just go to him because I think he was the only one at that time. But he doesn't speak too much English, but all his staff are Chinese speaking. I was the only one that went to Chinese school. And I'm the baby. I have 4 brothers and 2 sisters. There's a family of 7.
轉眼幾十年過去 ，Frances 仍然記得當年華埠嘅熱鬧景象。
When my children were born, by then we moved out of Chinatown. But when I was a child, it was still a tight-knit Chinese community, and everybody knew everyone. And I think that just about every weekend, it was either a wedding or engagement or baby banquet. My mother was I was a baby, so wherever she went, I went with her.
Frances 回憶喺年輕嘅時候求職嘅經歷之中，佢唯一受到嘅一次歧視。
I forgot to say thank you, so I turned around to say thank you. The man was just throwing my resume in that round basket. They're not hiring Chinese.
而對於華埠嘅今非昔比，佢深感遺憾。
It was very safe to go to Chinatown. I never witnessed or I've never heard people say anything that there would be discrimination. The Caucasian people loved to go down Chinatown. In those days, it was safe. You could go there at 2 a.m. in the morning. You're not going to get mugged or anything. Now, after 6 p.m., you better get out of Chinatown. That is a big difference from when I was a child. I'd like to see it continue because I remember that, and the Chinese people, everybody knew everyone. We're like a family.
同 Frances 一樣，陳雪英亦都有好多喺華埠生活嘅美好回憶。
The Chinatown I grew up in was a live, vibrant place. Businesses were thriving. There were many restaurants, and the restaurants were a lot of them on the second floor. Great places for dim sum. Lots of wonderful shops to buy. And Chinatown was a place where I felt safe and secure. We didn't have the drug addiction problem and the mental illness problem that we see today. It's different now. Chinatown is suffering.
喺經過咗半個世紀之後，陳雪英總能夠回想起母親嘅趣事。
And mother, to get our secretary, whose husband didn't like her leaving home for meetings all the time because they had 8 children, and some of them were quite young still. Mother would cook special soups for Bessie's husband, Henry, because he was an old-fashioned, guy who believed that the man was the head of the household. And she would bring it over to him and then say, well, I brought you some soup and I hope you enjoy it. And I'm going to take Bessie to the meeting. And he couldn't say no to her. My dad was very supportive. Yeah. He was very supportive. I remember when I came home from university that day, I expected dinner, right? So this is in 1968. And I came home and Dad was sitting there by himself. I said, where's Mom? He said, oh, well, she's gone to a meeting and you should go too.
咪下次翻嚟，我哋將會繼續同見證咗華裔喺家國嘅地位變化嘅華人，傾一傾佢哋當年嘅感受，聽聽溫哥華華埠嘅興衰歷史。歡迎翻嚟節目時間。隨住華裔喺本國逐漸受到平等對待，享受同等嘅權益啊， 咁好多年輕一代咧，對於家國華人嘅過去歷史就感到陌生，甚至對於自己嘅身份認同感到困惑。咁樣咧都令到部分本地老一輩嘅華裔感到擔憂。
That was in Victoria when we were living there. One summer, every 2 weeks, there will be every 2 months, there will be an emperor ship coming here. So I go down quite frequently to the outer wharf in Victoria.
96歲高齡嘅蔣北父 Wallace Chung 出生於卑詩省維多利亞市華埠。佢回憶話喺嗰個年代，佢哋唔能夠出門，以免受到傷害。
So we all lived within that ghetto, which these English people call the slum, and had a most pleasant time in our life there. So safe and contented. And no white boys will come out to play with us. You're not allowed to go there. So we grew up there. And fortunately, they created a Chinese school. So we do learn some Chinese. Then, as we grow up, then we move out of Chinatown and go to other places. But right before 47, there's always some prejudice against the Chinese.
成年後，蔣北父先後進入卑詩大學以及麥基爾大學學習醫學。咁喺1953年返到溫哥華綜合醫院成為一名醫生。咁同時亦都喺卑詩大學任職教授，直至退休。咁而佢仲有另一個身份，就係家國華裔歷史文物收藏家。佢用畢生嘅時間以及精力收集有關家國華人嘅歷史文物。並且喺1999年將25,000件嘅珍藏品捐贈咗俾卑詩大學。大部分嘅物品目前仍然珍藏喺以佢名字命名嘅收藏館內展出。蔣北父回憶話：喺佢父親嘅裁縫店裏面掛住一幅加拿大太平洋鐵路名下船隻亞洲皇后號嘅圖片，令6歲嘅佢非常着迷，就係咁開始咗相關嘅收藏。
First, I just called newspaper cutting, and then magazines, and then books. And when I grew older, when I started working, then I started collecting expensive things, furniture from the ships, equipment and things like this. And that's how the 25,000 items I have in the university are collected over the 60-year period. It means so much to me because of my whole early family, my grandfather, my father and mother all came from China on the CPR ships. So I don't know how many times I go out to the wharf to welcome some relatives coming. And that's why these ships are so, I have so much affection for all these ships and collecting everything I can find. It's a funny thing. When you start collecting, you start knowing people. And then more and more people know you're collecting CPR material. So that once anything come out of interest, I would get a call. That who so-and-so got the material, you better take a look at it. And I'll get there before anybody else, you know.
位於卑詩大學收藏品中嘅該艘亞洲皇后號模型，係蔣北父花咗6年嘅時間先至將其修復還原。而喺華埠蔣故館之中，亦都可以見到好多由蔣北父捐贈嘅歷史收藏品。
He is a trustee of the foundation, and when we were thinking about this, I said, "Oh, Wally, do you think we can borrow some things from UBC?" And he said, "Oh, I still have some things in my personal collection." So I feel very lucky. We have, an amazing team, both of trustees and directors and community members, all wanting to help. And I think, like so many great community projects, it takes a village to do them. So you cannot do it on your own. You need a lot of people helping you. You need people who donated stories and artifacts. They lent their time and expertise into trying to come up with this idea of the Chinatown Storytelling Center.
蔣北父已故妻子 Madeline Chung 蔣黃文英，佢喺華埠蔣故館嘅華人故事之中，亦佔有重要嘅篇幅。據資料記載，作為卑詩省第一位女婦科醫生，數十年間佢先後為7000多名嘅嬰兒接生。 由於蔣黃文英係當年溫哥華唯一能夠講中文嘅婦科醫生，成功打破咗醫生同孕婦之間嘅性別以及種族隔膜。華埠掌故館內展出嘅歷史照片、華裔文物、文字音像等，從淘金時期開始，一直到千禧年之後，介紹咗好多早期華裔嘅歷史故事。同時館內利用咗虛擬現實技術，還原翻溫哥華華埠嘅舊風貌，並且展示咗一啲被人逐漸遺忘嘅人物故事。
你看，都是非常的，可以說是他們也是很時尚，是吧？其實講華埠嘅歷史嚟講咧，我都好幸運可以講，因為係60年代嚟嘅，所以咧就可以講親身同埋親眼見到華埠嘅發展同埋佢嘅成長，同埋而家到而家呢個最近嘅情況咁。我覺得呢個係華埠係代表咗我唔止話我哋華人嘅歷史，亦都係代表咗整個加拿大嘅歷史。
葉吳美琪 Maggie 葉喺1973年係中僑互助會嘅創辦人之一，而創立互助會嘅初衷就係要幫助新移民適應本地生活，盡快安居樂業。葉吳美琪回憶話，早年亦都曾經遇過歧視或者係不公平嘅待遇，而佢就會選擇用自己嘅方式去回應。
如果大家覺得有呢種咁嘅不公平嘅待遇嘅時候，係不妨係講出嚟，因為大多數人都係好合理嘅。好有即係佢哋好可能有時候講啲嘢或者做啲嘢係唔想，即係唔知道啊，原來係侵犯咗人哋啊咁。
作為華埠基金會董事之一，葉吳美琪亦都參與咗華埠掌故館嘅項目規劃，而呢一度所展出嘅每一件物件同埋每一張照片，都能夠勾起佢嘅回憶。
華埠嘅呢個幾十年來嘅轉變，可以講真係好大，變得好大。咁我亦都覺得嚟講就係咧，歷史咧係活嘅，即係唔好似一個死死地一個喺博物館咁樣一種情況。咁於是呢一個嘅所謂叫做掌故嘅中心嚟講咧，就係能夠真真正正將新移民嘅或者係舊移民嘅家庭佢哋嘅經歷個古仔，可以嚟到同大家分享。好多嘅新一代啦，尤其喺本地出世嗰啲第3代、第4代、第5代嗰啲，佢哋可能對於我哋呢個中國歷史又好，或者係我哋華人喺加拿大嘅歷史嚟講咧，比較嚟講係冇咁清楚，或者甚至唔知道添。咁我覺得嚟講係好可惜㗎，因為咧呢個所有嘅歷史故事咧，就係造成我哋今日同埋將來嘅。
事實上，葉吳美琪所提到嘅問題 ，Francis 亦都有感觸。佢覺得對於華裔加拿大人歷史，好多年輕一代並唔了解，甚至對自身嘅身份亦都感到困惑。
My children, I sort of laughed at them, and I said to my 2 boys, they were about maybe 4, and they said, "We've got no one to play with." I said, "What do you mean no one to play with? There's Gary and I forgot his brother. They're our Chinese next door neighbor." He says, "But they're Chinese." I said, "Well, what do you think you are?"
So these are, I mean, this is a picture of me talking to the community.
而陳雪英就認為，如果想令年輕一代能夠對華裔歷史以及華埠有共鳴，並唔係一件容易嘅事。
Chinatown needs more people to come back and visit, and we need to have safe places. You know, we have to address our homelessness problem. As long as there are people who are homeless, we will have a really difficult community to keep clean and to keep healthy. So taking care of our most vulnerable, and that is the people with mental illness who are on our streets, would really help. Or the poor, the ones who lose their work and then find themselves without a job. I mean, unless we start to take care of people like that, I think Chinatown would have a harder time revitalizing.
佢亦都希望華埠掌故館能夠吸引更多人前嚟了解華裔歷史。
Chinatown was a very important place, and it was designed and built with very unique buildings for our societies. And I want to see Chinatown brought back to life, and I think the way to do it is to create interest and create opportunities for people to come back to Chinatown, and for our young people to take up the banner and to take up the interest.
When I was going to UBC, I would go and have dinner with them every weekend down Chinatown. And I know the city very well then, going to all the stores. And it's a very pleasant place for the Chinese.
而蔣北父就話：佢嘅祖父母以及父母最初移民家國所經歷嘅困難時期，以及受到嘅不公平待遇，對佢影響深遠。佢非常之高興能夠親眼見證華人喺本國逐漸得到平等待遇，亦都希望年輕一代唔好遺忘歷史。
Words to the younger people, the little people, is that forgive, but don't forget. If you forget things, it may happen again. They born and grew up in an era where they're treated equal, and they don't realize what the grandfather and the father went through. So they take it for granted. And that's why I collected the material and gave it to the university so that as many younger generation as possible will look through and look at the view. It's not easy to begin with. You're in a position that's just excellent now, but you should also know your past, because as the Chinese say, you know the past before you can surmise the future. So that is the purpose of my whole collection, to let the young people know.
好啦，今集嘅節目時間呢又差唔多啦。咁如果觀眾對我哋嘅節目有啲乜嘢意見嘅話，係好歡迎大家以電郵嘅方式同我哋聯絡㗎。我哋嘅電郵地址係 mag26@fairchildtv.com。如果觀眾咧想重溫翻今集嘅節目，亦都可以上到去我哋嘅網站3w.fairchildtv.com， 點擊節目重溫一欄就可以睇得翻㗎啦。下星期同樣時間再同大家見面，晚安。